Welcome to Cinematographer Uncovered. This series is presented by Golden Gate Films. I'm your host, Charlie Shan. Today we explore the craft, vision, and stories behind the lens with Nathan Wilson, a Los Angeles-based director and cinematographer. Nathan, your work spans award-winning films at Cannes and the Academy Awards for Best Foreign Film, and you've collaborated with incredible directors like David Fincher, Joel Schumacher, Michael Bay, and Sam Raimi. Can we start about talking about how you first got into cinematography, what drew you to telling stories visually, and what was that first camera experience like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think to start, I would just say I've been painting and drawing my entire life. And growing up in Los Angeles, the best summer job you could get, maybe other people might have a job working at a fast food restaurant or mowing lawns. Being a production assistant on commercials was like the coolest summer job. And when I graduated from high school, I started working on commercials, and it was pretty interesting because if the crew was a little understaffed, I would help the grips build a crane. Or if, the second AC needed to load a magazine, he'd go, here, hang out and slate while I go in the dark room and load film. And so the short answer is I just kind of worked my way up through the camera department and was really attracted to camera, and it seemed like fun. And um, at a certain point, I was working as a film loader on a feature film, and I'd gone to see a movie with a friend, and the movie was Seven, which Darius Kanji shot. And so, as someone who's been a fine artist all my life, I watched this movie and for the first time realized there was a decision maker there that was really an artist and was really thinking about color and texture and feeling and doing it with a movie camera. And so that was a very sort of aha moment, that working in film wasn't just a paycheck, but you could actually find a sort of artistically satisfying career, and you could be an artist and you could get paid and you could make movies. So that was a big unlock for me.
During your studies at the University of California, how did working on sets shape your approach to cinematography?
So when I was at the University of California, San Diego, I was making short films, and we would certainly maybe make a film a week. So it would be you sort of like write and shoot and edit and deliver every week. And at the same time, I was getting called to go up to LA and work as a camera assistant. So I was definitely, getting to learn a little bit from professionals how things were done, how things were framed, how things were lit, um, and certainly trying to apply that to our little teeny films. But again, we didn't have the same size crews, the same tools, or any of that. So certainly, the way things were done, the way things were organized, learning how to shot list, learning how to manage your time, learning how to schedule, those things were all very helpful. Knowing what a call sheet was, understanding that I needed to make a list of everybody I wanted to have show up for my shoot and call them ahead of time and feed them lunch. I think that was really useful. But I think there's an element of being a film student where you're sort of raised by wolves. Is I was one of the only people in my film school that had any experience on a film set, and so I think trying to bring a little bit of structure, a little professionalism to that was probably helpful.
And you've got a background in painting and color theory from the Accademia di Belle Arti. How has that influenced your style?
I mean, I feel like at the end of the day, a lot of what we're trying to do as cinematographers is sort of inform the audience of the character's emotional landscape. And we have a lot of tools to do that. But I think color is a really important one. That really what I'm hoping to do is kind of subliminally tug at the audience's heartstrings in a way that they're not going to think about it, but they're going to feel it. And certainly in prep, in conversations with a director, with a production designer, I'm trying to chart a whole color story throughout the movie so that as there's different jumping off points for the story, I'm trying to sort of work out colors that make sense and that bolster these emotional, seasons or eras. So there's definitely a focus. And I think it's just a really one of the more interesting conversations that I get to have with a production designer or with a director.
As a director yourself, which aspects of the set do you enjoy the most, and what has been the biggest challenge stepping into that role?
Um, so I should say that I have been directing commercials. I'm not directing feature films. but and occasionally I'm directing and working as a cinematographer as well. But I've really, again, enjoyed working with the art department, enjoyed building out the sets, enjoyed trying to make an environment that feels real and inviting. Certainly enjoying working with actors, sort of having fun with them, putting them at ease. Also, just feeling like there's a little bit of freedom to play. And so I think that's been really enjoyable is this kind of tennis match where an actor will do a take and I'll give them some notes and we'll keep going and just trying to keep the energy up and the vibe up. So I would say I've really enjoyed that. I've been very lucky to have my regular crew members with me on these commercials, so that often there's a pre-light day where I'm really more thinking like a cinematographer, working out the lighting, working out the camera move, working out all the technical aspects. And then when we're actually shooting, I sort of let a lot of that go and leave it to my key grip, my gaffer, my camera operator. And then I'm really there to focus on the actors and the performance and keeping it fresh, and also really there to be a real collaborator with the ad agency, with the creative director, like really making them feel like they have a voice and that they're getting what they need out of every take.
You've worked with some of the top directors in Hollywood. How do you connect with their vision while bringing your own perspective to the film?
I think everything really starts with the script, and I feel like we all sort of owe it to the writers to honor that script, and so a lot of that is in meetings. Um, you know, I'll receive a script when I'm up for a job. I'll pull maybe 100 images and I'll put together a whole pitch deck of what I think locations could look like, or what what certain characters could be lit like. And I think a lot of it is me taking my intuition when I read a script, and it's a good one, I can see it in my head, and trying to sort of put that on the page and then share that with the director and then say, what do you think? So I think the answer is we intuitively are attracted to certain things. And if we vibe with that director and they get on board with this vision, then we can start that conversation. And it's always a dance. And I've certainly taken some big swings visually in a pitch meeting, and it's been the opposite of what the director wanted. But they liked that I had ideas, they liked that I put the work in, and they realized that we had a simpatico. Um, so yeah, I think it's different with every director. Everybody brings certain skills and certain worldviews to the table, and it's kind of, can you navigate that? Are you going to have a good time with them? Do you enjoy the way they think and communicate? Um, are you guys going to have fun? I think that's a big part of that, because there's so many talented people to choose from.
On big blockbusters like Transformers, Pirates of the Caribbean 2, and Spider-Man 2, does the scale change your approach compared to indie films?
So two-part answer. The first one is Transformers, Pirates of the Caribbean 2, Spider-Man 2. These are films where I was not the cinematographer. I was a high-speed camera technician. So back in the film days, if you wanted to do a slow motion shot, you had to go to a company called Photosonics, and they built cameras that would move the camera through the gate extremely fast. And when you play it back, you get a slow motion shot. So in the process of my learning how to be a filmmaker, I spent several years going all over the world with those cameras and doing sort of high-end product shots and big budget action movies. Um, so I wasn't the cinematographer, but again, we can still apply the question of scale. And what I would say is I think it's been really useful for me to get to see how to do sort of little scrappy indie projects and documentaries and these huge movies that are $200 million. Um, so I would say that it's really a question of pace. Certainly, I would say that that time in Los Angeles, we probably had the best craftspeople in the world, and we were making films on a really grand scale, and things move slow. You would spend a whole week on a fight sequence, and the sets were giant, and there would be rain bars, and um, in the case of Pirates of the Caribbean, we were filming in the old factory where they'd made the SR-71, the Blackbird kind of spy plane, and it was so immense. You would start walking, and 5 minutes later, you'd be no closer to your destination. And so they had built full-size ships on motion control gimbals, and they'd had the entire place rigged with rain bars. And it was time to be in the middle of a rainstorm. They would flick a couple switches and the ship would start rocking and the rain would be coming out of the sky. And it was amazing. But I would say I think there's things to be learned from every project and every scale. And the larger it is, the more organization is required. And so I think really the thing to learn is the scheduling, the planning, the communication, figuring out what are the elements you're going to need, what's the crew you're going to need, how long everything's going to take, and how to really utilize those resources. So I think that's really interesting on a big budget film. I mean, the obvious challenge with one of these blockbusters is it needs to sell in many different countries. And so as a result, the script is maybe not so bespoke, it's not so regionally specific. Um, it's a different animal. Let's just put it that way. Um, After working on all these, $200 million films as a camera technician, I realized that I really wanted to have more of a creative voice and be a cinematographer and really, really contribute in a more meaningful way. And so I went back to doing movies that were $2-3 million as a cinematographer and getting to apply all the efficiencies and organization that I'd learned on these big budget things, but to a shorter schedule and a smaller project.
That's really exciting, and it makes me want to ask, can you share a memorable experience working with actors, for example, Tom Hanks or Will Smith?
Um, yep. So one of the funnest things I did recently is I worked on a documentary where we had called Pole to Pole, and so Will Smith is sort of traveling from the North Pole to the South Pole and doing all kinds of very adventurous things. And one of the things that was really interesting is we were doing master interviews with him in Los Angeles and kind of playing back different scenes from the Arctic and reminiscing about what he felt and what he learned. And we had to do what's called ADR, which you're basically the dialogue from the Arctic wasn't particularly clean and there was a lot of wind on it. And so we were going to have to re-record the dialogue. And what was impressive to me was not just that Will Smith was able to get the feeling of the lines, but because in this scene he'd been marching towards the North Pole and towing kind of a little sled full of gear, was a little winded. So he actually jumped up and down and got his heart rate up, and really got his body in the same position as when he was doing this scene a year ago, and was able to nail the sound, the feeling, the energy, the physicality of it. And that kind of specificity just showed me why he's a movie star. That he wants to be the very best at his craft. Um, Tom Hanks, I recently filmed him on an LED volume for a History Channel World War II series. And so he's the executive producer. And we had him for a couple of days on this LED volume as he was doing introductions to different chapters in this thing. And he was just lovely in that he really understood that filmmaking's a team sport. And he understood that it's not about him as a movie star, but it's really a medium where the crew needs to be your friend. And so what I admired was how much he was willing to sit and joke around with all of my crew and tell stories and just generally do everything he could to make us at ease and laugh and have fun. And that he understood that that was part of the gig. It wasn't just show up, say your lines, get the hell out. It was really how do you show up and build community and make alliances and have some fun while we're doing it. So that was a nice experience.
Yeah, that is really nice. Are there any actors you especially enjoy collaborating with, either in Europe or elsewhere?
The list is very long. Um, I recently did a movie for Paramount with an actress named Sophia Bush, and I just had a ball working with her. That she was the lead actress, and we were doing a thriller. We were filming in Salt Lake City, and we were filming in Park City, Utah. And she just was sort of an amazing leader that she knew her lines, she knew how to do her job, but she was also really focused on continuity, really focused on camera blocking. She was very willing to try to make every scene a little bit better and make things go smoother and solve problems, and just kind of led with her humanity. And I don't know, it just was really a joy working with someone that, again, wasn't just trying to do her job, but was also trying to make the whole set better for everyone. And through little and big things. But it's joyful when you're working with an actor who's excited again, it's a team sport. And when there's someone who's a team player and they want to help, and they're also solving problems too. It's not just you solving problems. So I really enjoyed that.
How does working in Hollywood compare to working internationally?
I think you have to get really sort of specific and regional. But I would say that in general, there's a kind of let's call it a division of labor, maybe an assembly line in Hollywood, where everything is very everyone's got one job because the scale is so large. Again, organization's a big part of it, and so um, I think that it's a little bit more militaristic in terms of breaking down every job and every responsibility and making sure nothing falls through the cracks. And the one department's not going to jump in another department. And I think it's very kind of stratified. But again, if you're going to make a large scale project, I would want to do it with an American crew for sure, because we're so used to this level of craft and speed and discipline. What I've really enjoyed about making films in other countries is a little more family style. I made a film in Hong Kong, and the lines between the different departments is a little more blurred. That the sound mixer is going to help the grips carry some dolly parts. The camera department's also going to be helping wardrobe carry stuff. In Hong Kong, we were mostly filming in all these high-rise hotels. So everybody, instead of having trucks to work out of, is really loading everything in individual rooms, and we're there all day. And I just think there was a little bit more of a kind of family vibe. And again, maybe slightly smaller, a little less organized. I would ask for, is there a piece of equipment here? And they'd say, it's coming. I said, okay, well, is it coming in 5 minutes or is it coming in an hour? Oh, it's coming. So things were a little more loosey goosey. And again, you have to get really specific to each country, because I've worked in Japan, I've worked in Korea, I've worked in India, I've worked in, I think I did 5 movies in Romania and Bucharest, and fantastic crews there. Very, very skilled, really artistic. The people really care. I would say that what I've learned from all this working all over the world is the question I ask often when we're scouting and we're planning is, how do you do this here? How do you solve the problem in this country? Because me trying to apply a Los Angeles piece of equipment or a Los Angeles solution to a crew that doesn't use it, that's not going to be a winning strategy. The winning strategy is, what are the tools you guys are used to using? What are the processes you guys use that you're comfortable with, you do every day? How do we solve this here? And I found that was a really important question, a really huge unlock. So part of prep and part of scouting is getting to know all the crew members and all the department heads, and where they come from and how they like to work, and what their solutions are. Because that solution in the jungles of Panama that they're going to get right every time, that's the right solution. Me trying to use something overly complex in a country where they're not used to doing that, never going to win.
Yeah, I want to ask about that because you filmed all over the world: Italy, Romania, Argentina, Korea, India, and more.
Mm-hmm.
How do the locations shape the stories you tell?
Somebody once told me that choosing locations for a cinematographer is kind of like the director choosing the cast. That especially if you're not doing builds, if you're doing location shoots, the DNA of the place is in there. The style of interior design, the hardware, the fittings. There's a whole history. There's a whole language in each culture built into their architecture and built into their design. Um, so I would just say that the location is a huge part of what you're doing, especially if you're not doing a build. I tend to want larger locations with more space to light, more space to put in dolly track. So scale, we're always asking for a little bit more. But in terms of the flavor and the feeling, I think choosing those locations is hugely impactful. And I think often what we're doing, we choose a location is we're trying to reflect who the character is that inhabits it. And there's so many layers of meaning. To me, a lot of my conversations when these projects were talking in the set deck department, if this person's lived here for 10 years, what are the artifacts? What do we know about them? What are their habits? What are their fears? What do they love? I think when people are in a space that there's layers of meaning and things build up. Often I find that humans are not so minimal. They're more pack rats, that there's this things tend towards decay and entropy, and part of that's really interesting. Um, is what are all these little details? What are the ticket stubs? What are the things they end up collecting, and how does that speak to their psychology?
Do certain cities like New York ever feel like characters in your films?
I think every city is a character. Um, and again, what you're looking at is the history of the place. Is who are the people that built this, and why was it built here, and what does it feel like to walk around? What does it sound like and smell like? So again, I did a movie in Hong Kong that was it's just such a strong character, and it's such a city of contrast between the old and the new, and they're both sort of competing at the same time. Like it's sort of like a little teeny fishing village that got really really built up quickly, but that soul is still there.
Living in Madrid for a year, how did that experience influence your creative perspective?
Well, I think one of the things happens if you're sort of a student of world film is you end up watching a lot of the films that are made in that place. And so, for me, Almodovar is kind of one of the big voices of Spanish cinema. And you end up kind of tracking down these places where things were filmed and shot, and thinking about what it feels like. Um, so I think it's a couple things. One of the things with living in Spain is I was already fluent in Italian, but I learned to speak Spanish. And what I find with language is it's this kind of lens through which you view the world, that there's a whole set of ideas that come with each language. Um, so yeah, I don't know exactly how to answer the question of what did I learn or how did it influence, but certainly part of it is just there's a different way to live here. There's a different timetable, there's different food, there's a different sort of rhythm to the daily life, and I think that really affects you. That if you've lived in one city and one way to cook and one way that people spend their time, it's really interesting to see this whole other world and a whole other different set of rules.
In working with international crews, how important are language skills and cultural awareness?
I would say that it's everything. And I try very hard in every country I go to learn a few, kind of survival words. When I did a movie in Romania, and I told the producers I need to find a language teacher because I've got 2 months of prep here, and by the time we start shooting, I want to be able to ask for what I need on set in Romanian. And I think the point is that what you're doing is you're showing respect. Um, just by making the effort. That if you're in someone's home, I think it's respectful to try to speak their language and understand their rules. Um, and I think that's true in every culture. That really there's all these kind of secret handshakes, and unless you've really spent some time, you won't understand what they are. And the what you get in return for that respect is a lot of help, a lot of support. Ultimately we're trying to kind of create loyalty, and there's many ways we do it. But in prep, I'm taking all the different department heads to dinner. I'm getting to know them. We're scouting. We're hearing about their journeys. I think one of the sort of truisms is if you make somebody feel important, if you ask them questions, if you listen, they feel heard and they feel seen, and they will give you more. They will work harder for you if they feel appreciated and seen.
You mentioned fix it in prep, and you touched
Hmm.
on this. Can you talk about why preparation is so key to your work?
Well, I think it's key to everything, but in really basic terms, you need to think about what are the crew and the tools that you're going to need for every shot. And you need to think about this way in advance because it needs to be there on the day. You need to build it into your schedule, and you need to build it into your budget. So a big part of prep is figuring out what are the shots and the locations and what are you going to need. The other thing is once you've done that prep work and you have the right crew and you have the right tools and you know what you're trying to do, then you have flexibility. Then you can on the day say, hey, we have all this, we have this crane, and we don't need it. Maybe this is better as a Steadicam shot. Maybe this is better at a lock off. But to try and do it the other way, which is you're there, you don't have the tool, you wish you wanted it, it's never going to happen. So I feel part of it is that as a filmmaker, I think intentionality is really important. And so the way that you figure out what your plan is you put the time in a month or two ahead of time. You do a page turn with the director, you scout locations, you talk about, there's this shot we want to do. Is there enough space in this location? Can we change this shot and still get the right feeling? Or do we need to find a new location? And, how do we solve this problem? But it all sort of comes from having a plan.
Great. And then when you're there, how do you balance intuition and technical precision on set?
I think by the time you've gotten to set, I think you can be a lot more sort of relaxed and intuitive and creative because ideally you have a plan. Ideally, you know what all the coverage is, you know what the lenses are, you know where the lights are going to go. You've already got that all built in. Your team knows what you're doing. Um, so because of that, I think it frees up a little mental space for like, hey, well, we're already here. The camera's already here. What if we, instead of doing a push in, we do a pull back here? What if we make this a split screen? I just feel like it's really important to not get locked into one dogmatic way of, well, we talked about it 2 weeks ago, it has to be this way. Um, if there's a better idea, if someone on the crew has a better idea, if the director, if the actor says, hey, what if we try this? How cool to be able to say, let's try it. Let's see what's better. I would say one of the things I found is, in general, instead of having a long discussion or a debate about any of these things, almost always easier to say, let's do it. Let's do one more take this late. Let's try this. So much quicker than having to sort of debate the merits of something.
Speaking of debating, collaboration with production designers and directors is crucial. How do you make sure the visual world comes together seamlessly?
Um, I am really big on visual references. As I said, even in the process of trying to get a movie, I will put together an archive of images. And then as we are prepping, in conversations with the production designer, with the director, I will end up putting images on the wall in my office. And so by the time prep is done, I've probably broken down every location by um, photographic references, a color palette, framing, texture, emotional references. And I would say that every meeting we're changing, we're updating, we're sharing, and often the directors say, oh, send me that, I want to have that to look in my office, so while I'm doing rewrites, while I'm doing this. So I think it's just a lot of sharing ideas, and it's a lot of, what do you guys think? Do you guys like this? Is this right? And so I think it's a lot of discussions. And I think part of it, to me, what collaboration means is it's not ego. It's, how do we solve the problem? How do we make it better? Meaning it doesn't have to be my idea. It's just, as a community, how do we decide which direction we're going? And then how do we reinforce that and build upon that?
Do you have preferred cameras or lighting setups when capturing emotional and epic moments?
Um, well, cameras and lighting setups are really different, right? Like, I I think I think in general, I prefer to make the actors look really beautiful when it's appropriate, or if it's a really awful moment, then you make it look pretty hard. But I would say, interested in using softer lights, interested in something that's kind of glamorous. In general, I feel like the leading lady is kind of the important person in each movie, and they should look appropriate but good. Um, the truth is, there's a lot of good camera systems out there. I have mostly used cameras from Arriflex and cameras from Sony. They're just very robust. They're really strong. They don't shut down. They don't. I kind of torture test them all, and these are things that that don't break. In the jungles of Panama, we had a Sony Venice, and it kept working through rain and steam and hot sun, and it was robust. And I think that's important. And again, when you get into post-production, the colorists are always very happy if you're using an Arriflex camera or if you're using a Sony camera. The color science is good, the skin tones look good, the workflow is easy. So those are kind of my go-tos.
Moving from technical to more inspirational. Who has influenced you the most as an artist or filmmaker?
Well, as I said earlier, I think Darius Kanji's early films, Delicatessen, I thought was really amazing and painterly and cool looking. And I thought Seven was really good looking. So certainly, in terms of playing with color and palette, I just thought Darius Kanji, his early work was really interesting. Um, I think for every project, we do kind of a deep dive based on that subject matter, based on that location, based on those characters. And I'm looking at painting, I'm looking at photography. Like, I don't think you could have any one influence, but I would say every single film is kind of starting from zero to see how do we take this idea and these words on a page and find images that really resonate and are really going to communicate what we want to.
Now, looking back, which project are you most proud of and why?
Well, I really like this film we did in Hong Kong called The Modelizer. And part of how it came about is I was on my way to North Vietnam for sort of a winter holiday. And a friend I was traveling with had a Groupon for a dumpling making class in Hong Kong and said, let's stop in Hong Kong overnight. Let's go do this dumpling making class. And I was there for 24 hours. It was Christmas Eve, and just kind of fell madly, deeply in love with the city. That I just thought it was so rich and so interesting. And I'm, of course, a big fan of Christopher Doyle's work with Wong Kar-wai. So it was a bit like a waking dream, sort of walking through this city I only knew through cinema, and this, contrast of the ancient and the modern. And when I got to Vietnam, all I could think about was, I want to go back to Hong Kong and spend more time. I want to make a movie there. And so in January, when I got back to Los Angeles, I reached out to a Hong Kong actor I've done a bunch of movies with and said, hey, I want to make a movie in Hong Kong. Um, let's write a script. Let's do something. What would be your dream project? I want you to be the star. I want to make this movie. And we eventually got a director I worked with a lot named Keone Waxman involved. And he and I and the actor came up with all of the character names and the situations and the scenario. And the actor went back to Hong Kong and wrote 7 drafts of the script. And it was during the pandemic, and he knew a bunch of sort of millionaires who were hanging out and bored and couldn't travel. And he raised, $3 million and said, "All right, guys, we're making the movie." And so the idea of wanting to learn about a city, approaching these people, building a team, and ultimately getting to go there and spend 3 months making a movie in the middle of the pandemic was pretty dreamy. After sitting at my house for 7 months to get on an airplane and go someplace that beautiful was very special. And the film was a lot of fun, and it was great locations. And again, our lead actor, who's also the producer, kind of Hong Kong's favorite son, he knew so many people since he grew up there. We got free locations and cars and restaurants and hotels, and he really sort of, Hong Kong opened its doors to us. So that was a lot of fun.
Great. Building on that, and it might be a repeat question, but in case it's not, do you have a favorite film that continues to inspire your work?
A favorite film that somebody else made or that I made?
It could be either one.
Um, that's interesting.
Yeah. The idea is that it continues to inspire your work.
I mean, what's funny is I try and watch The Big Lebowski every year, but more out of entertainment. Like, I just always find some new little wrinkle or something in it. But as far as like a film that I'm really excited about, I don't know. I mean, Apocalypse Now, keeps on giving. It keeps being interesting and surprising and, meaningful. Um, I don't think there's a particular film that I'm like, this is the movie. Um, but certainly there's a number of, I watch Lawrence of Arabia projected in 78 millimeter once a year, and that's kind of exciting when you think about scope and scale. But the short answer is no. There's not one movie that I keep going back to the well on.
Okay. Now, for young cinematographers hoping to go global, what advice would you give?
I mean, the first thing is just shoot everything you can. That every time you're on set is an opportunity to learn and meet somebody. And I think every day on set, not only are you learning what to do, you're learning what not to do. And so I think all of these things are important. But I think it's just like when the phone rings, you say yes. And regardless of how big or how small the project is, how can you best support that producer and that director and those actors? What can you do to help to make it better? And that's the people you hire. It's the energy you bring to set. It's having some patience. It's having some empathy. It's realizing that you're part of a team, and that it's the movie is not doesn't live or die by how beautiful it is. It lives or die by how good the performances are. And so I think it's really important to be judicious with your use of time, meaning if you spend all the time lighting and the director and actress don't have many takes, you're not really being generous. What you're saying is the lighting is more important than the acting. And I think the truth is the opposite, that this is a medium about story and character. So what can you do to make that important? How can you simplify your process, or be better prepared, or just create a better energy for the actor and the directors to create? I think that needs to be always at the forefront.
Which makes me want to ask you, what types of stories are you drawn to now, and what's coming next?
um, I'm always fascinated by anything where the acting is at the forefront, but I would say that I'm sort of drawn to dramas, anything that's a little more operatic, anything where there's an opportunity for the actors to really stretch their legs. um, and I think I'm a little drawn to the dark side of things a little bit. So true crime's always fascinating. I think there's a number of things percolating. One of which is a true crime story that's set um, in Ireland. So I'm hoping that might be the next thing.
Oh, very interesting. You've called cinematography a universal language. Can you expand on what that means to you?
Um, I just think that my dream is that if we did a good enough job as visual storytellers, that you could turn the sound off, and without any music, without any dialogue, you would know how you feel about each character, where they fit, what the relationships are, and what the drama is. And so I think that as human beings, we're visual creatures. And I think if we did it right with the camera movement and the lensing and the colors, that everything you need to know just from the imagery.
Great. And to wrap up, there's a quote: "A cinematographer is a visual psychiatrist, moving an audience, making them think the way you want them to think, painting pictures in the dark." Do you agree or disagree?
I agree really strongly. I mean, I feel like what we're really trying to do is subtly tug at the audience's heartstrings and subtly inform them of where the character is on their arc. And I want that to be a visceral experience and not an intellectual experience. So I think that psychology is really the thing, is what can you do with camera movement or with color or with depth of field to make an audience feel something. And so I think it's really a high art, especially building suspense is really, I think, a high art, and it is a lot of psychology. And people know when they feel it in their body. So I think what was the quote? A visual psychiatrist.
Well, that's what I was wondering because I thought they normally gave like prescribed medication.
I might change it to psychologist, because I don't I don't know about all the drug metaphors, but I think the idea is that somehow you're using visuals to get an emotional effect.
Okay,
And
so
I,
the
I
psych
would
it's
I
more
would
the
say that
psychologist on the emotions then.
I would think so. Um, and I would say that the closest sort of thing that's similar in filmmaking to being a cinematographer is to being a composer, because again, you're really trying to subtly, subliminally affect the way people feel and where they experience something. And if they notice that you're pulling the strings, I think that you haven't done it right. So I think subtlety is really a huge part of that.
Wonderful. Nathan, this has been such an engaging conversation. hearing about your process and experience really gives a sense of the collaboration and the passion behind filmmaking. So, if it's your first time listening, this is Nathan Wilson, director, cinematographer, and global visual storyteller. Thank you for sharing your insights with us. And to everyone watching, thank you for joining us on an episode called Cinematographer Uncovered. There's a real conversation about the craft and the passion that goes into filmmaking. I'm Charlie Shannon. This series is presented by Golden Gate Films, bridging worlds through cinema. Thank you, and see you next time.
What a pleasure. Thank you very much.
You.
All right.